very big welcome to Angela. Thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Pretty good. How you
Yeah,
doing?
I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm excited to talk to you. So, I would love to hear a little bit about how you would talk about yourself. We'll go into more stuff about your background, but yeah, who are you? Let our listeners know.
Well, I'm Angela. I currently live in Spain, so definitely still need to work on my Spanish. I thankfully I speak Filipino and English, which definitely helps. Even though I stumble every day, just having to, like doing daily activities in Spanish. It still helps, and my dominant language right now is English. Recently, I was with family, and they were commenting on how, "Oh, why don't you speak this and that?" And a whole, the 120 languages of the Philippines. Like, thank
Oh,
you.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's always interesting when the family context shifts the linguistic environment, right? So I think what would be so helpful is if family could just be quiet sometimes personally and just comment less on juggling multiple languages is exhausting as it is. Yeah. I am going to just go through your bio for a second because I think I saw that you say you have a smattering of Vietnamese and Swahili. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've been living abroad for 15 years, and most of that has been in Vietnam. But sadly, my Vietnamese is horrific because I can't really hear the tones.
Okay.
Um, I can probably read a little better than speak Vietnamese,
Mm,
but yeah, I mean, you speak a tonal language, so you you probably know how other people deal with this. So
yeah.
I'm constantly like, if I'm speaking in Vietnamese, I constantly have to try all the different tones just
Mm,
to see if one of them might actually be the right one.
oh, yeah.
So that's me with my Vietnamese.
Yeah.
I'm pretty much, I think, the level of maybe like a 5-year-old child. I know my
Oh,
colors, numbers,
oh,
uh,
yeah.
I know my animals and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of food. Food is
Yeah.
very important to me, so I speak a lot of different languages when it comes to food, but
Mm-hmm.
that's it.
Yeah.
And Swahili is because I lived in Tanzania for a time, but my Swahili is more kind of like transactional. I can
Mm,
kind of, tell someone where I live, how to get there or
yeah.
whatever. But I didn't really, so I used to teach English, but I didn't teach young kids that much when I was in Tanzania. So I didn't really pick up a lot of Swahili that way, which is how I picked up my Vietnamese.
Mm,
So
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, was it English teaching that brought you to both of those countries, or was it other life things?
yeah, well, um, there's a little bit of backstory about that. I really wanted to get out of the Philippines, not because I don't like the Philippines, but just because I felt like I wanted to travel, but the best way to do it is to live somewhere and work there because it's just not very easy to go through immigration in the Philippines for Filipinos.
Mm.
So yeah, I ended up going to Vietnam, and teaching was the first job I fell into because it was something I could do, and then
Mhm.
realized I actually liked it. So I ended up maybe 2 years later, 2 years after I'd already, taught English,
Mm.
I decided, okay, like I'm actually going to pay for a course and
Yeah.
you know,
Go
well,
all in.
I could finally afford it. So
Yeah.
I yeah, I have a certificate to teach English to adults and to kids.
Yeah. Okay. So that is something I actually will say I overlap with because I was working before doing my certification, and I don't know your perspective on this. I personally felt like before doing my certification, I didn't actually I think feel it was necessary unless I wanted to be in a formal classroom environment. But doing it, I realized, my God, what a gift to have already worked inside of the industry before actually going through the material, because I would not have appreciated the course at all. Yeah. What did you think?
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that because so during my CELTA, I did notice that some of my classmates who had never taught English before doing the course really like had no clue whatsoever. And also because they were native English, speakers, they had no idea about grammar and things like that. But because I had been teaching Vietnamese students for 2 years, they had taught me grammar
Yes.
because they would constantly ask me questions.
Yeah.
Even knowing how to transcribe pronunciation, that sort of thing. It was just something that they made me do so much. But by the time I did the course, it's like, oh, I actually, this is not difficult
Yeah.
because I knew how to do it. I still had to unlearn some things, of course, because, you pick up different things from wherever you've been teaching, teachers you've probably seen teach. But yeah, I think the course was valuable, but I think, yeah, it's true. I think it made it more valuable because I'd already been teaching before that.
Yeah. Which I think some people actually how do I put this? They think that the course is going to qualify them. And I almost feel that it's better to talk about it in a professional development way, right? You take the course because you want to expand what you're already doing. If you don't start, you won't be able to actually push into that expansion. It's going to be, I don't know, archiving information and then later needing to draw from it when you actually begin, right? And so the best way and personally, I would say is like just start for a lot of people, right? You don't have to wait to be qualified. Doesn't mean you are qualified. Let's clarify that piece, but it does mean that you don't have to necessarily put so many barriers, right, to beginning. So I would love if you could talk a little bit about your experiences as an English teacher working in the field. It can be, abroad or whatnot, but tell me everything that you feel in this regard.
I guess, I don't know, one memory that really stands out is perhaps, like when I first started teaching, I was 24,
Mm,
and some of my students were in their 40s and their 50s, and they were asking me for advice. And
mm,
they really wanted to, like they were listening to me intently. And I was just shocked. I go, like I thought I was just going to teach them the language. Why
mm,
is it? I don't know how it is in other countries, but in Vietnam and definitely in Tanzania as well, people usually look up to teachers. And so I mean, I thought it was flattering that they were listening to me, but
yeah,
at the same time, I thought, oh, wow, this is a huge responsibility. I really need to be careful about what I tell them. And I would always try to say things like, this is what I know, or what I think is, but I'm not very sure. Like, you should try it first, and maybe you should ask other people because there are some people who are perfectly happy to just, oh, okay, my teacher said this, I'm going to do it.
mm,
And, that terrified me because I just always thought, like, I mean, I don't know, like, do I have enough experience to even be talking about these things? Because they would ask me things like, oh, how about like, what if I want to study in the US? And I go, I didn't study in the US. I know I
mm,
sound American, but I didn't study in the US. So I can't really help you on that. But then they just always thought, oh, you're a foreigner. You must talk to other foreigners. You can get us this information.
yeah,
So yeah, it's a lot of responsibility being a teacher. It's fun. It
yeah.
can be fun, but it's also kind of heavy at times.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know or underestimate the emotional burden that goes, and it's not only emotional, it's just the energetic burden on people in these roles. And you're right that I think in many, at least my personal experience, has shown me that people in many countries believe that teachers hold a position of authority. Teachers know what they're talking about. Teachers are there for a reason, right? And when you're like, I mean, I wasn't even 24 when I started. I don't even remember. I was a teenager because I was still trying to do this to make my resume look good if I'm being really, really honest with you. And I was like, yeah, I'm a Mandarin speaker. I'm serving the Mandarin speaking community, blah, blah, blah. I love helping people, right? And you're absolutely correct that in that moment, you realize, oh my goodness, these are people who are trying to change their lives, trying to settle into new countries, trying to go for new opportunities. Who am I to be talking to them, giving them life advice? It's not just about the language. It's like, how do you integrate into society? I hadn't even had a real job yet, right, at that point. And people were like, how do I interview? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I think you just say this. And they're like, yeah, okay. And they're writing down notes. So this burden on the professional side, it's everyone's individual decision to decide how they handle it. I do think that you and I realized that you teachers, people in this instructional setting play an important role in shaping the paths of other people. I do also think that there are some that then take that a little too far and go, "Oh my God, I have all this power. I must know so much," right? Have you worked with those people before? I have. It's been a little bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, I laugh about this with my friends. We're, also in ELT, but we go, you just kind of get all sorts of people because there are people who do go into teaching because they really want to teach. But I mean, I was also like one of those people who just did it because it was something I could do.
Mm,
So, yeah, there's just all sorts of people who end up educating people and you don't even know what their actual purpose is. And yeah, before you know it, you have so much power and it can be crazy because there are times where, my parents would come up to me asking me what I think they should do with their kids. And I go, I don't even have kids.
yeah,
And I'm not, I didn't even go to school for early education. So all these
yeah.
things that I'm telling you are anecdotal,
Mm,
but for them, it's so important that, like, "Oh, I need to hear a teacher's side on this."
right.
And yeah, like, in the staff room, you end up talking to other people and they go like, "Oh, I just told them this just because I thought it was funny." And you go
Mm,
like, "Oh my God," you never know how far that's gonna be taken by, whoever heard that advice. So with great
yeah.
power comes great responsibility.
Absolutely. You know, I think it's hard to find that balance. And I don't know that because there is something to be said about taking too much of that responsibility inside and to feel the weight of it. I know when I started Cultivate, and this is after, I mean, I was doing part-time English teaching and actually all the things that I criticize now, I am guilty of before. So like I'll talk about that in the future. But all of these different moments that then brought me to creating this company, I I think even more than I expected. I realized going into this full time, just I cannot seriously be saying whatever. I cannot just be out there promoting some wonderful new idea, even though I do think my some of my programs and my ideas are innovative and cool. They I cannot seriously be misrepresented, you know? Yeah, I think that's why it's so cool. We connected. It's cool in the conversations we've had. Some of the stuff that you've said, I just find so necessary in this time because very few professionals in the field are willing to externally, I think, speak on the problems in the field and the problems in the world. So I am wondering if we can kind of go into that. What sorts of, and I've seen, stuff that you've written, but what sorts of things would you highlight as what's wrong right now? What we could improve, perhaps?
Well, one is, of course, I think this is something that we've spoken about where, when you're talking about specific things where you need to know when to generalize and when not to. I think that's a really big thing because I don't know, for me, language has always been super important because I don't know, as a kid, my mom would always tease me that, oh, my daughter is a philosopher. She's always thinking
Mm,
about, like what this means and what that means. And because it can, like, language is great because it allows us to communicate with each other, but at the same time, it can be so misunderstood. The moment that you say, like you flip a little switch, you add a little word, and then
Mm,
it becomes totally different. And so, of course, this is also something that I know, that when we say things like "Don't do this," we automatically, delete the no, and we just do whatever has been mentioned by the teacher, by the adult, or by authority, whatever. That's just how the human brain works. So, how we teach, not just what we teach, but how we teach it, also really needs to be carefully thought about. I
mm,
mean, I'm that sort of teacher who, like, I was never very good at planning things before the class.
mm,
Or I could plan it, but it's for a specific group of people. Like, I need to see them to know what I'm gonna do. So like, I wasn't that sort of teacher who would be planning endlessly. I kind of like have a loose plan and I go in there and I just do it. But I do think that what happens is we just kind of need more self-reflection, I suppose.
mm,
Like, after teaching a class, let's say you figure out what you did right, what you did wrong, how that worked, and try to remember that, or maybe take note of it for the next class, because then that's how it can actually be useful, where you go, oh, you know what, because I didn't plan it out, or maybe I didn't say this right, how can I express it better the next time? And I mean, earlier you were saying, like, the things that you criticize were things that you were guilty of, years ago. But
yeah.
we're allowed to become better. We're allowed to improve. And so,
Amen.
yeah.
Amen.
and because of that, like, that's why I think self-reflection is so important, because it doesn't mean that, oh, like, I did a terrible job, but you know what, I can still do it better next time. And I don't know, I was perfectly happy to, let's say, if I know that I taught something that was incorrect, I'll go back the next class and be like, "Oh my god, by the way, everyone, you know what? Last time I told you this, it's not actually correct. It's this, that, whatever." I think that, for one, it makes teachers look human as well.
Mm,
That, oh, you can, of course, we also make mistakes, but instead of covering it up, we need to be able to talk about it gracefully, to accept corrections from students as well, and just be like, look, I may have misrepresented myself, or I may have said something wrong the last time. I think that we can be kind to ourselves, but also be honest with our students, And I think that sometimes it's like, oh, you know what? Like, I'm just gonna say that, I'm gonna stand by what I said just because I've
mm,
already said it, and I can't be bothered to correct myself. I don't really believe that.
yeah. Yeah, the amount of people I see, and even online, which online it's like a different, it's a different playing field. You have records, you you have the receipts, right? So why are you trying to stand by what you said when it is blatantly wrong instead of just realizing that's a growth area you probably need
Yep.
to look at? Personally, I realized that especially as a an adult language learner later on in life, I really realized, oh my God, this is a huge problem in the field. This is not just something that is hitting at the early education level. This is an industry problem. This is a culture problem. This is a you were given this position of authority and responsibility, but then without the accountability, right? This is
Hmm.
so frustrating to see. But I'm like always flipping between professional side, learner side, professional side. I'm just like my brain is exploding watching this happen. And there's so many things I think I want to say. There, I mean, you've said them all beautifully and in, I think in a really personal way because this is, I think, something we all experience maybe not all, but many of us experience as we go through our own path in this field. But talking about it now, I do think we are bringing it out into the open, and there is so much power in that, right? I don't want to criticize for criticism's sake. I want to talk about how we can transform what currently exists. So before going, because I really want to talk with you about what you think is going to come in the future, but before going there, let's jump back into the past for a second because I don't think a lot of listeners know or can tell that you did not grow up in a native English speaking household. Is that right?
Yeah, so I don't know. This was my parents' experiment when I was a kid and
Lovely.
when my sister was born. So my
Yeah.
sister is almost 7 years older than I am. And when she was born, my parents decided that her first language would be English. So for the first 6 years of her life, she only spoke English. And she, I guess, like when I was born, that's when she started learning how to speak Filipino.
Mm,
My first language was Filipino.
mm,
But at the same time, my parents would switch from one language to the other. It was up to them. Basically, if they chose today to be English, then it was going to be English. For all of us, it was Filipino, then Filipino.
mm,
Um, like for one, when I was younger, I was very, I really don't like what we call Taglish, which is a combination
mm,
of Filipino and English. I find it really unpleasant
mm,
because my parents raised me to just speak one language at a time. There could be like a word here and there, but more or less it should just be whatever language you know, they say is the language for the day.
mm,
However, even though I say that I grew up bilingual that way, at the same time, I remember being about 6 years old. And I suppose I was watching TV and looking at a child my age, probably in the US, and she was speaking in a way that I couldn't. So I have a distinct memory of not being able to speak fluently in English in the way that a kid my age could. The difference was that I was reading far above my age because I have this kind of thing where I'm kind of addicted to anything written. I need to be able to read it. And
mm.
so like I would read everything that I could, and most of it was in English because there aren't when I was a kid anyway, I'm sure now it's different and I've
Mm,
seen that there are a lot more books written in Filipino. But when I was a kid, most of the reading material would be in English. So I could read them all, but I wanted to be that kid. I wanted to be able to switch to English that way. And so something that I started doing was, well, my dad worked abroad, so I would send him, like I had like a little cassette tape that I
Oh,
would send him cassette tapes
yeah.
that I would record, and I would read him stories.
Mm.
I
Uh,
don't know if my dad actually
listen.
listened to them because I would seriously like just read him any kind of story that I was reading at that time, and I would read it out loud, with all the different voices and kind of the narrator and all that. And I would just talk to him because we didn't have a phone at that time.
Mm,
So that was the way that I would communicate with my dad. And my dad, interestingly enough, many, many years later, I was already an adult and he told me, you know what? Like the first few cassette tapes you sent me, your English wasn't very good. But I was already an adult, okay? So like I go like,
yeah.
wow, I mean, great that you're telling me, but I'm really glad that you didn't tell me when I was a child
Mm,
because I think that that worked, to my advantage because I was never afraid of practicing my English with my dad, doing it that way.
yeah.
And by the time I was 8, I remember because I moved to a different school, I was already, like English and Filipino, I could switch easily by then. So,
Mm,
yeah, I suppose it took me, I don't know if it took me 2 years, but I just remember it being at that age where it was finally just set that I could choose when to actually just speak in Filipino and when in English. But
Mm.
yeah, but before that, it was a different story.
Yeah, I'm curious to know if your parents, just because have, I think, small clues as I talk to people and see what went on in different parts of the world. I'm curious to know how they were first introduced to English or if they were required to learn it in some way, and then how, because for sure, I think it's part of the story and why they felt it was so important to transmit to you.
So I mean, in the Philippines, English is taught. I mean, I say this not really knowing exactly what my parents' experience was, okay? But this is what I think would happen is at the age of 8 or something like that, that's when there's more of the subjects would be taught in English.
Mm,
Like before that, a lot of the subjects are taught in Filipino except for the English subject. And then maybe second or third grade, at least for my case, everything was pretty much switched to English except for the Filipino subject and history.
mm.
So yeah, everything else. Like I have no clue how to do math in Filipino. Like math is only in English for me.
Yeah.
um but yeah, for my parents, so my mom's hearing is also going. So maybe that's also like a problem these days. But my mom definitely didn't speak as much English as much as my dad did.
Mm,
My dad was pretty much polyglot. Like he spoke a lot
mm,
of different languages, and he grew up in the countryside. So he didn't really have when he lived in the countryside, he didn't get as much opportunity as kids who grew up in Manila did.
mm,
My mom grew up in the city near the capital, but what my dad did was as soon as he could go to Manila, he just tried to learn as much as he could. And
yeah.
so for him, I mean, for him and my mom, education was very, very important. And in the Philippines, it's just important if you want to work in, like, if you want to have a better job, English was always essential.
Right, right. Did you get any crap is the only word coming to my head right now from your peers? From I'm thinking, when you were a kid, and you having the exposure to this language and we're gonna call it privilege, but it's a very like, thin line here that we're kind of making. In terms of having a family environment that encouraged this, right? To then later on think about your future, etc. Were you ever kind of treated in a certain way by your schoolmates, classmates, simply because you had this interest?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely so my school, when like the second elementary school that I went to when I was 8 years old, they had this, English speaking policy.
Mm,
And I love to like I love doing it. I go like, fine, tell me to speak English, I'm gonna switch to English. But everyone else, well, most people tried to get away with kind of speaking in Taglish,
mm,
or they would just speak less. And as soon as the teacher was out of the room, they would speak in Filipino. And I got a lot of flack for sticking to it. But at the same time, I just really thought like what's so wrong with it? I just couldn't figure out
mm.
why I shouldn't do it,
Yeah.
So even though I heard that from most people, at the same time, there were some things that we did in school, some activities where it, it's always that sort of thing where they made fun of me, but at the same time, if
Mm.
there was some sort of competition in school and somebody needs to speak English, to go San Angela. And then they're
Yeah.
all like, "Oh yeah, we're so proud of you." I go like, "But you were just making fun of me the other day." But
Yeah.
you know, uh-huh. But never mind that. Like I just
Mm.
continued on, and yeah, like I mean, I still found like it wasn't. I was kind of bullied, but I still had friends, so I didn't really care very much.
Yeah. Yeah, I ask only because I didn't live exactly the same thing. I lived I think a different version of the same. I think it's always, kids, jealousy everywhere. But I have come to see, especially as I've lived in other countries across the world, and of course, my friends who have kids and whatnot, and in my own personal family situation, my partner has kids. And so I realize, wow, there is a lot of this language-based jealousy that especially for English, that I think, and you mentioned that you're happy your dad didn't tell you that you didn't speak so well or that you didn't express so well when you're a kid. I realized that there's a lot of this mental fortitude that has to come early on for kids to stick to their guns, to continue cultivating their love for the language, because everywhere they go, it can be in school, it can be in their communities, it could be at home, they will receive some sort of judgment, shame. Um, yeah, I think it's particularly tough as a kid. I think as an adult, we know how to handle criticism, hopefully by now. And so it's kind of like, oh, you're going to judge me. All right, whatever. Right. So like that, what is it to you? As a kid, I think it's really, really hard. So I just want to recognize, I guess, the fact that you had to go through all that and to come out the other side, not just working in the field and like thriving in it, from my perspective, right? But also getting to the point where you are able to bring in, I think, those deep personal experiences to every single interaction that you have with other people, right? So the reason maybe why you cared so much about your students in Vietnam, or why you went that step further, I do think it comes from empathy. I think it comes from being in that position at one point in your life.
Yeah, for sure. Like I get it when students say like, "Oh, I don't get enough time to practice English," or I feel embarrassed when I speak English in front of,
Yeah.
in front of peers or in front of people who have the same mother tongue. And I had to go, well, you kind of have to choose. Like I get it because I know that it's not fun when people are saying, not very nice things when you try to speak in another language. But at the same time, I go like it has to be your choice. If you really want it, then
Yeah.
you can either just find people who are like-minded, you can ignore them, you can stay in the library like I did. I don't know, like there are ways around it, but I do get it, and I can't tell them that, oh, like that's not the way to do it. Like you're doing it wrong. You're not doing it wrong. It's just that's how you feel. You need to deal with it because yeah, I mean, I was recently visiting family in Italy, and my uncles and my aunts, like they've got these grandkids who are growing up speaking mostly in Italian. At home, they hear a lot. They hear like two different languages from the Philippines, but at the same time, they can't really communicate well in it. And I mean, I hear my aunts and uncles kind of like, teasing them or making fun of them for
Mm,
not being able to speak it. And I go, well, you didn't really, raise them in a way that they could use both languages. So so why
yeah.
blame the children who right now like they're just trying to live in their world, which is, all Italian. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, like I think that there are just so many different sort of stories and situations that we can't completely, tell somebody that, oh, you could have done this or you should have, learned this other language or you should have used this, but you didn't. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just very difficult because I know that it was difficult to
Yeah.
choose to be bilingual.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a conscious choice you had to fight for, I think, again and again. I think I surprise people also when I say that I was made fun of in school for my English because the way I was using it, even being born and raised completely, right, in the US, it's like as pure as it gets for some people, right? Like if you take the international perspective. I still received crap because of the fact that I didn't use it in the same way. And I had to make the conscious choice to actually speak this in a certain way. And it's what's really interesting is in my family, we have different levels and ways of using both languages, so Mandarin Chinese and English. And I don't even think there's a person, I don't think we came to the same conclusion. I don't think we, between us, we speak English. Okay, so you'll hate me for this because I do mix the languages a lot. I love it actually. Now that French has entered my life, I mix the three and it causes so much confusion. But I love the mental exercise, you know. I realized only a few years ago how much I had to really, I think it's unconscious at the time, but you're like, I want this. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to keep holding on to it. I'm not going to let it go. I'm not going to let anything or anyone, distract me or derail me from this. That takes so much strength, you know? So let's jump because we're running out of time. I want to go more, but I realize I want to take some time with this. Can we talk a little bit about the future? Can we talk about what you can imagine for us? We talked a little bit about growth areas for the industry, but let's also frame it in the context of AI has now entered our lives. And while it is a wonderful tool, technology is advancing to the point where you do have many learners who feel that they can just substitute learning with technology. I think we can agree that that's not going to happen anytime soon. What other things do you see for the path down the road?
Huh. This is, I mean, recently I was just talking with a couple of like high school kids who, were very proud to tell me that their current favorite website is Chat GPT. And yeah, like which is fair enough.
Mhm,
it is a fun tool to use. I've played with it, a few times as well, but I just think that for the future to actually, I don't know, look brighter for everyone involved is that definitely teachers really need to step up their game and learn how to use AI, but also how to teach, how to teach students how to use it better,
mm,
smarter, instead of just using it as a crutch,
mm,
to actually use it as a tool that they can manipulate for it to be able to get them the results they need. Instead, because I mean, my joke with my students before was always like, like I'm trying to teach you the tool so that you can manipulate the language because, teacher Angela is not going to be in your ear all the time. But then of course here comes AI, which could potentially be in your ear all the time, right?
yeah.
But then I go, do you really want, I suppose. I mean, it really depends on what your priorities are.
Mm,
There will be people who would want to put all their effort into learning other things, and language could be, I don't know, the least of their problems. Who
mm,
knows? But for those who really want to continue fully communicating without, not really without the use of technology, that's stupid because it's something that can help us, but not using it, not being dependent on it.
mm,
So there's kind of that. I think that there is, I don't know, like I feel like I'm hopeful. It's the same way, with calculators before and now, we can use it, but it doesn't
mm.
mean that everyone has forgotten how to do math. Like, okay, a lot of people maybe have, but
Yes.
but let's just
Myself
say
included
that it's
occasionally.
still
Yes.
it's still a skill,
Yeah.
so same thing with languages. I do think that it's still possible for us to use technology. I love technology, but at the same time, still be able to communicate without it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think at some point people will find their, happy medium where they're able to use these as tools,
Mm,
but not exactly just depend on it. And, yeah, I think it'll be fine.
yeah.
It'll be a lot of work for sure.
Yeah.
It'll be a lot of work, but I don't think it's going to completely, take away, let's say, educators' jobs. But for, educators will have to fight for it as well.
Right. Yeah. I like that you kind of talked about what I see as the shared responsibility between educators and learners because I think there's a lot of this talk of okay, so wonderful parallel that I make also with calculator use. Like, no calculators. You must do everything by hand, right? Because if you don't, you're not going to appreciate it. You're not going to know. Or I really think that there's space for both. There's space for the old school and the new school methods. However, we can't also expect the the education side just to stay where it is, right? We have to adapt. We have to adapt our materials, our approaches. And I do think that's where there is this lack of maybe it's training or maybe it's something it's like professional training and development is where I want to talk about it, right? I don't know. I don't actually keep up with a lot of these large organizations and conferences because I do find that it's a lot of the repackaging of the same, or it's trying to sell some sort of new method or framework and get everyone to ascribe to that, and then just become little what is it called, like when you go door to door to sell, right? But you basically just, instead of makeup, you're selling like the newest teaching method, right? And so I do have this hope, I guess, that eventually people will come to their own individual, I don't know, realization on this and just say, okay, I'm just going to take things into my own hands. When I'm working with this person, I'm going to take a very conscious, uh, self aware approach to how I interact with them, AI notwithstanding, right? Because I don't think we're going back. Do you know what I mean? ChatGPT has entered, like, and
Yeah,
is not
it's not
leaving,
going to
you know?
disappear anytime
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah, yeah. It's very interesting when it gets philosophical also. I don't know if you've had these experiences recently, but just talking in the language space with some people who are language learners who really do believe not just that AI will replace all of learning, but I see in what they write and how they talk that they've never made the connection between language and communication. They've never seen that how they use even their own language is not replaceable, is not, cannot actually be reproduced in the same way. So, what other things do you think we as a world should move into? I mean, we talked about so many, but are there other areas that you think we're overlooking?
I mean, you've basically said it. It's, like looking at language as part of communication, not as an entity by itself,
Mm.
not just, oh yeah, like I think I remember an old employer who said something to that effect to me, like he said, "Oh, our students just want to say these things in English instead of Vietnamese, but they don't need to know why they're doing it." And I just go like, how does that even happen? If you don't know why you're doing it, how are you supposed to be able to fully express yourself in that
Yeah.
language? You know?
Yeah, without that
And
personal connection, right? Like how just cut it off, just be a robot and just repeat.
yeah, and I thought that that was really odd. And I go like maybe, like say, I don't know, at a very basic level, maybe you don't really need to know exactly why you're saying everything you are, but to be forever ignorant in it is it's just I don't know, it's something that I couldn't understand, and I'm still definitely against that. We should really think of language is our tool for communication. It's our tool to understand each other. And I mean, that's always what the world needs more of, you know?
Yeah.
If we don't communicate better, if we don't listen better, then how are we ever going to get anywhere?
Yeah. I think English presents a challenge that I haven't found to be at the same level, at least for other languages, simply because it's the international language of today. It's the one that so many people speak in so many different ways. You have countries that have English as an official language without it being one of those, I guess we can consider the quintessential native speaking countries. I have a whole thing I want to say on this, it's not the time, but I find it Yeah, I find it presents different types of barriers, and yet at the same time opens up so many other doors because you have all of these things. So it's a double-edged sword. I mean, it helps and hurts at the same time, right? But it's also something that I don't think is going away. I think all of us kind of there's sometimes talk online like, let's bring back Esperanto. Let's try to create a new international language that's equitable. Oh goodness, like the committee to, to form an international commission or committee to agree on all of this. Do you think that's going to be fast? Do you think we're going to just all be like, all right, so like France gets like 5% and Germany gets like, and like, how much representation can we actually have? So I just want to thank you for joining me today to talk about all these things. Last kind of bonus topic, I suppose. I just wanted to throw in here. You are in Spain, so you mentioned at the beginning that you are working on Spanish. Would you like to share how you're working, what your kind of approach has been, things that are working for you or you've tried?
Well, I mean, at one point, I attended classes for 3 weeks in Madrid, which is not the city where I live, just so, like I went there because I felt like I could actually practice it better if I don't know, if I was someplace where they had intensive classes and a lot of activities that you had to attend in Spanish, like, like go to museums and stuff like that.
Mm,
And that kind of worked for me. But honestly, like right now, all I do is do language exchanges.
mm,
Um, I know that for some people, people always say, oh, like to be fully immersed in the language, you just move to a country that speaks it and you'll be fine. You'll get it all. Like, it's not like that.
yeah.
Every day I say, how much is this? Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I can say those things perfectly. I
Sorry,
can
excuse me. Thank
yeah,
you. Where is the
yeah,
train
like,
station?
where they go like, "Oh, wow, you can say that perfectly." I go like, "Yeah, like, I mean, I have to do it every day."
Mm,
But, you know, um, for me to be able to actually practice chatting about different things, I have language exchange partners because, like, the shopkeeper doesn't have time to, like, talk to me about my day or I don't know, like, I guess here they do talk to shopkeepers about their day, but in really fast Spanish,
mm,
so I'm not there yet.
yeah.
So yeah, language exchange is what I do these days. Should probably do more, but
Mm.
I don't know. That's all I have energy for these days.
Yeah. Do you have different people that you talk about different topics with, or is it more general? Because I, in my own personal experiences, I realized, okay, some people are more interesting when they talk about certain things, and so I started to organize it that way.
Yes and no. Yeah, like I mean, there are certain things that I specifically talk to specific people about. But then, I mean, because my goal is, at some point I need to be comfortable talking about many different things to
Mm,
whoever I need to, then it just kind of I let it develop organically. I more or less have some topics that I usually talk to, like say my friends' parents are, they're my parents' age and I hang out with them and there are usually specific topics that we veer towards and I'm helping one of them learn English but he always wants me to translate everything from
uh,
Spanish
mm,
uh, which is a mental exercise that I didn't expect to be doing but yeah but
yeah.
so like I kind of have specific things that I reserve for some people.
Mm. Thank you so much for talking today. It looks gorgeous, by the way. This is a fake background because it is, I mean, we're in different time zones at the moment, but your sunlight, I'm just so jealous. This looks like a beautiful space, behind you.
Yeah, well, at least now I think I've got 30 more minutes of sun.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Mm.
it's I just thought it would be nicer to sit here than usually like I would be right over there. Like I work over there because I need a blank wall for my
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
But
yeah,
your background actually looks like a virtual background that I have. Like, I have to put this on. I don't
I
have
thought
this.
about it earlier, go like, oh, like there's a chair over the boat.
No, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing your space, your time, your words, your energy. I really feel so, the word is blessed. I'm trying to not be so cliche about it. It's basically the idea that we just don't know who we're going to come across online. And we could all for sure be there being like, yeah, fantastic. I agree. Right. But to find people who are willing to actually speak on these things, to take an hour out of their very busy day in Spain to come and to talk about their life. I just appreciate you so much. So thank you for being here.
And I've really enjoyed it. I knew from, I think, like the first time I found your account, that there would be so much to talk about. So
Mm,
this is wonderful.
yeah.
I didn't expect it to be recorded, but
Well, yeah, because things are important to, to say and then to save and then to share, So
Mhm.
this is what we do. Okay. Thanks so much. So